I'm Eliza Bennett, 32, standing in the opulent grand foyer of my grandmother's sprawling mansion. The air, usually thick with the scent of old money and polished wood, now carried the sharper notes of expensive cologne and freshly brewed espresso, heralding the arrival of our annual family conference. I felt, as always, like an alien in my own bloodline, a quiet observer amidst a dazzling array of relatives dripping in designer labels and luxury watches that gleamed under the antique chandelier. My simple navy blue blazer, a sensible, mid-range purchase from a Banana Republic sale rack, felt like a deliberate act of defiance against their sartorial opulence. The only glint of metal on me came from my mother's delicate pearl studs, heirlooms that held sentimental value rather than exorbitant price tags. These humble choices, a stark contrast to their gleaming watches and diamond-encrusted rings, didn't just draw glances, they seemed to magnetize a low hum of hushed, disdainful commentary, a subtle but unmistakable ripple of disapproval that followed me like a shadow. 10 long years I had endured their thinly veiled mockery, their pitying whispers about my perceived financial struggles, all while I silently and methodically built an empire in the shadows, brick by painstaking brick. They saw my modest car, my unassuming clothes, and concluded I was floundering, a poor relation perpetually struggling to keep up. Little, indeed, did they know what secrets were meticulously organized within the unassuming leather briefcase clutched tightly in my hand. Before I plunge deeper into the intricate web of family dynamics and financial machinations, I'd love to know where you, my audience, are joining me from. Drop your location in the comments below, hit that subscribe button to join our growing community, and stick around to witness the dramatic culmination of years of quiet determination, to see how I finally, definitively, showed my status-obsessed family what real wealth truly looks like and what it truly means. My family, the Bennetts, have been an indelible fixture in Boston's elite real estate landscape since the 1920s. It was then that my audacious great-grandfather, a man with more foresight than formal education, parlayed a surprisingly substantial, but still modest inheritance into a budding empire during the roaring post-war economic boom. He saw opportunity where others saw only rubble and uncertainty. By the time my formidable grandmother, Elizabeth Bennett, took the reins in the 1970s, the Bennett name had become utterly synonymous with luxury properties, high-end developments, and astute investments spanning the entirety of New England. Unlike her brothers, who chased ephemeral trends and reveled in ostentatious displays of newfound wealth, Grandma Elizabeth was a profoundly shrewd businesswoman. She possessed an almost ascetic belief that true wealth should be quiet, purposeful, and largely invisible to the casual observer. It wasn't about what you owned, but what you could do with what you owned. My father, her youngest son, inherited not just her sharp intellect, but also her remarkably pragmatic approach to life and finance. He fell deeply in love with my mother, a vibrant and compassionate kindergarten teacher who possessed absolutely no family money, a scandalous choice that sent seismic shockwaves through the rigid, status-conscious echelons of the Bennett clan. Despite the family's palpable dismay and thinly veiled disapproval, my parents chose a modest life, settling in a quiet, unassuming suburb far from the gilded cages of Beacon Hill. Dad worked diligently as an architect, dedicating his talents to designing homes he genuinely believed people would love living in functional, beautiful spaces that fostered life, rather than mere status symbols designed for fleeting impressions. Mom, meanwhile, continued teaching, shaping young minds with the same quiet dedication my father applied to his blueprints. They instilled in me a fundamental truth that echoed Grandma Elizabeth's philosophy: money was a tool, a means to an end, never an end in itself, and certainly not a defining personality trait or a measure of one's inherent worth. Then, when I was a vulnerable 15-year-old, my world, which had felt so secure and loving, collapsed with a sudden, devastating impact. My parents were killed in a car accident while driving home from a peaceful weekend trip, leaving me utterly alone. Grandma Elizabeth, with her characteristic quiet strength, took me in. I still remember the hushed, almost conspiratorial whispers of my aunts and uncles, who openly speculated that I would inevitably become the Bennett family's perpetual charity case, a financial burden to be begrudgingly accommodated. In those first excruciatingly painful months of grief and adjustment, I would often find Grandma Elizabeth late at night in her vast, wood-paneled study, a sanctuary filled with the comforting scent of leather, bound books and pipe tobacco. She would be poring over faded old photo albums, her eyes distant with memory, or meticulously reviewing dense property portfolios, her mind sharp and focused even in the small hours. "Eliza," she would say, her voice soft but firm, looking up from her papers. "Most of the family has forgotten what wealth is actually for. They think it's about showing off, about acquiring more and more, but real wealth is invisible. It's security, it's opportunity, and most importantly, Eliza, it's the power to effect real, tangible change in the world." During the 3 pivotal years I lived with her before leaving for college, she taught me more about finance, investment strategies, and the intricate art of property valuation than any university course or business school ever could have. She didn't just teach me facts, she taught me a philosophy. She showed me how to meticulously read nuanced market trends, how to identify truly undervalued properties, hidden in plain sight, and most importantly, how to cultivate an almost superhuman patience, a virtue she believed was the cornerstone of lasting wealth. My cousins Brad, Victoria, Taylor, Jessica, and Blake grew up in a profoundly different financial ecosystem. Uncle Richard, who had seamlessly stepped into the role of family patriarch after my grandfather's passing, was a staunch, almost zealous believer in conspicuous consumption. He seemed to think that the measure of a man was the size of his yacht, or the make of his car. His own children, and those of my other aunts and uncles, were lavished with expensive sports cars for their 16th birthdays, took luxurious, globe-trotting vacations every single school break, and wore only the latest designer clothes, their lives a perpetual parade of visible affluence. Meanwhile, I quietly drove the reliable, if somewhat battered, used Toyota my parents had left me. I worked multiple part-time jobs throughout high school and college, meticulously saving and investing every single penny I could spare, often forgoing even small pleasures. Grandma Elizabeth passed away peacefully during my senior year of college, leaving each grandchild a modest, but still significant inheritance, while my cousins with predictable haste used theirs for substantial down payments on sprawling luxury condos in trendy districts, exotic, Instagram-worthy vacations to far-flung corners of the world, or even more ridiculously, Blake bought a small yacht he barely used, more a symbol of leisure than an actual vessel for enjoyment. I, however, followed my grandmother's sagacious advice to the letter. I continued to live simply, residing in a small, unassuming apartment near my university, a stark contrast to my cousins' extravagant new abodes. I continued working, and with a precision born of careful study, I strategically invested my entire inheritance into small, often overlooked properties in genuinely up-coming, revitalizing neighborhoods. These were areas that the established real estate players, like Uncle Richard, wouldn't even deign to consider, too focused on the immediate glamour of high-end developments. The annual family conference, initially conceived by Grandma Elizabeth as a means of ensuring family unity, fostering shared purpose, and maintaining the Bennett legacy through collective endeavor, transformed dramatically after her death. Uncle Richard, seizing the opportunity, subtly but decisively reshaped it into a blatant display of status competition. The agenda became an unspoken but fiercely contested battleground. Who had the most impressive portfolio update? Who had acquired the most expensive, most exclusive possessions in the past year? which cousin had achieved the most meteoric career trajectory. Every single year, I would arrive in my simple, understated clothes, share my deliberately vague and understated updates, a new consulting project here, a small, unremarkable investment there, and patiently endure their thinly veiled pity, their knowing glances, and their subtle, almost imperceptible nods of feigned sympathy. What none of them, not even in their wildest imaginings, knew was that by my 28th birthday, my meticulously built portfolio had quietly grown to include 12 residential properties and 3 small, but strategically located commercial buildings, all purchased through a labyrinthine network of anonymous LLCs, each transaction carefully guided and advised by Grandma's old and incredibly discreet lawyer, Mr. Winters. Last year, a piece of intelligence reached me that shifted my entire strategy. The sprawling, high-end apartment complex where Uncle Richard's daughter Victoria, my cousin Blake, and 3 other extended family members lived had quietly gone on the market. The owner, an elderly and reclusive real estate magnate, was retiring and specifically looking for a quiet, off-market sale to avoid alarming his long-term tenants. Using an even more complex holding company structure that Mr. Winters meticulously helped me establish, layers upon layers of corporate anonymity, I purchased the entire building for a staggering $28 million, nearly every single cent of my available liquid capital. I then, with Mr. Winters' continued guidance, quietly implemented a series of subtle but impactful improvements to the building, upgraded security systems, modernized common areas, improved landscaping, all while keeping my ownership completely anonymous. I even raised rents slightly, though deliberately well below the prevailing market rates, a small but necessary adjustment for the added value. And now, as I meticulously prepared for this year's family conference, the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. I received word through Mr. Winters that Uncle Richard, ever the pragmatist when it suited him, planned to propose selling Grandma's mansion itself. This grand estate, the very heart of our family legacy, the last physical connection to Grandma, Elizabeth's quiet wisdom and enduring values, was to be liquidated for profit. The profound irony was almost unbearable. Here I was, standing in this magnificent house, watching my family flaunt their easily visible, shallow wealth, completely unaware that the poor relation they had mocked and dismissed for years, the one whose opinion they considered worthless, literally owned the very roof over many of their heads. I pulled up to Grandma's mansion on Friday afternoon in my reliable, 10-year-old Toyota Corolla, the same car I had been driving faithfully since my college days. The circular driveway, usually a pristine expanse of gravel, already gleamed with a dazzling array of luxury vehicles. Brad's brand, new Maserati, a sleek, obsidian beast, was parked prominently near the front steps, practically screaming its owner's arrival. Aunt Catherine's imposing Mercedes SUV, Uncle Richard's stately Bentley, and various other high-end cars that probably cost more than most people's entire houses were scattered across the manicured grounds. I strategically tucked my humble Toyota between Blake's gleaming Range Rover and Victoria's pristine BMW, my car looking like it had accidentally wandered into the wrong, vastly more expensive neighborhood. Taking a deep, fortifying breath, I smoothed down my simple navy blue blazer and checked my minimal makeup in the rearview mirror. My reflection a mask of carefully constructed composure. The mansion itself looked exactly as it always had, utterly timeless and magnificent. 3 stories of elegant brick Georgian architecture, with stately white columns flanking the imposing entrance and perfectly manicured gardens, stretching across 4 acres of prime Boston real estate, a verdant testament to generations of Bennett stewardship. Walking up the wide, cool limestone steps, I felt a familiar, complex blend of warmth and apprehension. This place had been my sanctuary, my refuge after losing my parents, a place where I had found solace and reconnected with the true essence of family. But now, Ironically, it also represented the widening, almost unbridgeable gulf between my carefully chosen life and those of my relatives. I had arrived purposely early, hoping to soak in some peaceful memories, to ground myself in the quiet history of the place before the full family circus descended. Martha, the long-serving housekeeper, who had been with our family for over 30 years, opened the heavy oak door before I could even ring the bell. Her face, etched with a lifetime of quiet service, broke into a wide, genuine smile. "Miss Eliza!" She beamed, pulling me into a warm, enveloping hug that smelled comfortingly of lemon furniture polish and freshly baked cinnamon. "So wonderful to see you!" "You look more like your grandmother every year. Bless your heart." I smiled genuinely for the first time that day, a real unforced smile. "Thanks, Martha," I said, a wave of familiar affection washing over me. "You're still the best welcome committee this place has." She lowered her voice conspiratorially, her eyes twinkling. "You might want to know that Mr. Richer has been here since morning, rearranging the conference schedule and meeting with the family attorney, Mr. Jenkins. He seems very determined." This wasn't surprising news, but it certainly confirmed my deepening suspicions about his plans for the mansion sale. Martha, with her usual efficiency, helped me carry my weekend bag to my old room, the very one I had lived in during those formative, healing years with Grandma Elizabeth. Unlike the other guest rooms, which had been redecorated multiple times to reflect changing trends or the whims of visiting relatives, this one remained largely unchanged, a time capsule. The same pale blue walls, the familiar white furniture, and the beloved window seat overlooking the sprawling rose garden that Grandma had cherished so dearly. I ran my fingers over the spines of the books, still lining the bookshelf, my old favorites, well-worn finance textbooks mingling seamlessly with classic novels, the sturdy notebook where Grandma had meticulously taught me to track complex stock movements, and the small, framed photo of my parents and me at Cape Cod, taken the summer before they died. I was in the midst of unpacking when a soft knock came at the door. My cousin Jessica stood there, slender and poised, her smile a rare beacon of consistent kindness within the often judgmental family. "Thought I heard you arrive?" she smiled, leaning casually against the door frame. Unlike our other cousins, Jessica had forged her own successful career as a pediatrician, a path she had chosen out of genuine passion, rather than family expectation, though she still maintained the expected level of family luxury. She wore designer jeans and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my entire outfit. Yet her eyes held none of the usual judgment or pity I typically faced from our relatives. "I wanted to warn you before everyone shows up," she said, her voice dropping slightly. "Uncle Richard has big plans this weekend. He's going to propose selling the mansion." Though I had suspected this with increasing certainty, hearing it confirmed by Jessica, someone I trusted, made my stomach sink with a cold dread. "But this place is our heritage," I whispered, the words catching in my throat. Grandma would never have wanted that. She specifically willed it to the family. Jessica sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly as she came to sit beside me on the bed. "I know. Believe me, I know. But he's talking about unlocking the property's true value and modernizing family assets. He's already got most of the votes lined up." "Votes," I repeated, a bitter taste in my mouth. The Bennett family governance structure was another of Uncle Richard's post-Grandma innovations. Family decisions, particularly financial ones, were weighted by one's declared contribution to the overall family holdings. This meant Richard, as the most commercially successful and ostensibly the largest declared contributor, effectively controlled most significant decisions. My relatively small, publicly declared holdings gave me minimal voting power, a mere token. "Is that why we're meeting for 3 days instead of the usual 2? I asked, a new wave of apprehension washing over me. Jessica nodded grimly. "Exactly. property discussions on Saturday, financial reviews on Sunday, and the big vote on Monday. He's even bringing in developers to present concepts for luxury condos where the mansion would be. My heart sank further, a leaden weight in my chest. This place wasn't just a building, a collection of bricks and mortar. It was the last physical connection to Grandma, Elizabeth's profound wisdom and deeply held values, a tangible embodiment of our family's true history, not just its financial ledger. The very thought of it being demolished to make way for yet more high-end real estate, yet another monument to commercial greed, felt almost sacrilegious. "I'm going to fight this," I said quietly, the words firm despite the tremor in my voice. Jessica squeezed my hand, a silent gesture of support. "I know Eliza, and I'll back you, but be prepared for resistance. He's got his ducks in a row." She glanced at her sleek designer watch. "Everyone's gathering for dinner in 20 minutes. Victoria's already asked twice if the poor cousin has arrived yet." I forced a thin, mirthless smile. Wouldn't want to disappoint her, would I? After Jessica left, the quiet of the room enveloped me, allowing me a precious moment to center myself. I had come to this conference with a carefully formulated plan, but now the stakes felt exponentially higher. The battle wasn't just about my personal vindication. It was about preserving Grandma's legacy. Dinner that evening unfolded exactly as expected, a meticulously choreographed display of wealth and status. Crystal glasses clinked softly. Fine china gleamed under the soft glow of the chandelier, and the conversation was a carefully curated symphony designed to highlight everyone's latest achievements. Acquisitions and philanthropic endeavors, real or imagined. Uncle Richard, holding court at the head of the impossibly long mahogany table, where Grandma Elizabeth used to preside, dominated the conversation. He spoke at length about his latest development project, a sprawling commercial complex in the heart of the financial district, completely sold out before construction even finished. He boasted, swirling his 30-year-old scotch, the amber liquid glinting like liquid gold. We had to turn away buyers, simply couldn't meet demand. Aunt Catherine chimed in, her voice dripping with affected modesty, recounting the triumphant success of her annual charity gala, which, she pointedly noted, had raised 100,000 more than last year's, though. She added, turning her gaze directly to me, "I haven't seen Eliza's name on any philanthropic donor lists lately. Perhaps a career change would allow for more civic engagement." The subtle jab was as predictable as it was cutting. My cousin Brad, now an executive at Uncle Richard's company solely due to blatant nepotism, relentlessly steered the conversation back to his new Maserati. The waiting list was 9 months. He smirked, casting a sideways glance at me. "But they expedited it for our family name. You know how it is." He then turned his full attention to me, his eyes gleaming with malicious amusement. "What are you driving these days, Eliza? Still that Toyota? Goodness, I thought surely you'd have upgraded by now." I took a slow, deliberate sip of water, allowing myself a moment to compose my response. "Still serving me perfectly well, Brad," I replied, my voice steady, betraying none of the quiet anger simmering beneath the surface. Uncle Richard's wife, Patricia, a woman whose empathy rarely extended beyond her own immediate circle, made a sympathetic clicking sound, a sound designed to emphasize my perceived plight. "You know, dear," she cooed, her voice saccharine sweet, "if you'd just let Richard mentor you in some property investments, you could afford to upgrade your lifestyle a bit. A new car, perhaps, a nicer apartment." I bit back the overwhelming urge to inform her, with a cool, sharp precision, that my property investments were, in fact, doing quite spectacularly, thank you very much, without Richard's mentoring. Instead, I simply smiled, a tight, polite curve of my lips. "I'm comfortable with my choices, Patricia." "Thank you." The subtle digs continued throughout the lengthy dinner, a relentless barrage of casual cruelty, references to exclusive clubs I didn't belong to, comparisons of vacation homes I didn't own, discussions of astronomical private school options for my cousin's children that I couldn't even dream of affording if I had kids. Despite it all, despite the thinly veiled contempt and open pity, I clung to a fragile hope that once they truly understood the full, complex picture of my life, once the facade was finally stripped away, there might still be a path to a genuine family connection, a foundation built on something deeper than superficial wealth. After dinner, seeking a temporary reprieve from the suffocating atmosphere, I walked the grounds alone, seeking solace in the cool evening air. My footsteps led me instinctively to Grandma Elizabeth's beloved rose garden, now illuminated by the soft, ethereal glow of discreet landscape lighting. Standing there among her carefully cultivated flowers, their delicate petals shimmering like silk in the moonlight, I resolved again, with a fierce, quiet certainty, to preserve her multifaceted legacy, both the physical mansion, a symbol of our family's true roots, and the profound, enduring values she had so carefully instilled in me. Whatever happened this weekend, whatever challenges arose, I would find a way to honor her memory, even if it meant finally revealing the meticulous, decade-long empire I had been building in the shadows, an empire completely hidden from their status-obsessed eyes. Saturday morning arrived with a pristine, golden autumn sunshine streaming through the sheer curtains of my childhood bedroom. The light, usually a comforting embrace, now felt like a spotlight, highlighting the momentous day ahead. I dressed carefully, choosing a pair of tailored black slacks and a simple, elegant blue blouse, professional, understated, and certainly not showy. The main family conference was scheduled to begin promptly at 9 o'clock in the grand drawing room, a room steeped in history, where generations of Bennetts had made pivotal decisions that shaped our family fortune, for better or for worse. Entering the room, I immediately felt the palpable shift in atmosphere. The usual array of ancestral family portraits, usually gazing down from the walls with silent judgment, had been removed. In their place, starkly modern architectural renderings of sleek, glass and steel condominiums were strategically displayed, almost as if to erase the past and impose a very different future. Uncle Richard, ever the showman, stood at the front, beside a digital projector, his figure silhouetted against the bright screen. My cousins and their spouses, impeccably dressed and radiating self-importance, filled the antique chairs, arranged in a semicircle, their faces a mixture of expectation and bored familiarity. Several faces I didn't recognize sat in the back row, presumably the developers Jessica had mentioned, their presence a palpable symbol of the commercial vultures circling our family home. "Ah, Eliza, good of you to join us," Uncle Richard announced, his voice booming slightly as I slipped quietly into a seat beside Jessica. He didn't even bother to wait for a response. We were just about to begin our discussion on family image and standards. I nodded politely, a neutral expression on my face, acutely aware of how several cousins exchanged quick, knowing glances when I sat down, as if my presence alone were an amusing curiosity. Richard, launching into his presentation with characteristic zeal, clicked through slides that displayed the Bennett Family Holdings logo, emblazoned on increasingly luxurious and architecturally audacious buildings. "Image is currency in our world," he proclaimed, pacing back and forth in his Italian leather shoes, which probably cost more than my entire monthly rent. "The Bennett name opens doors, yes, but only if we maintain certain standards in how we present ourselves to the world, how we project our power." His gaze lingered meaningfully on me for a moment, a subtle, pointed admonition, before he continued, seemingly oblivious to my internal reaction. After discussing several large-scale development projects already in progress, he advanced to a slide ominously labeled, "Family Residence Reassessment." My heart sank, a cold, heavy stone in my chest, as a beautifully photographed image of Grandma's mansion, framed against an impossibly blue sky, appeared on the screen. As you all know, Richard intoned, his voice taking on a gravitas usually reserved for eulogies. This magnificent property has been in our family for 4 generations. While it undoubtedly holds immense sentimental value for some. He paused, his eyes flicking towards me. It's sitting on 5 acres of prime real estate currently valued at approximately $45 million. That's $45 million in untapped potential, sitting idle. Aunt Victoria, elegant and impeccably groomed in her designer suit, her perfectly highlighted hair gleaming, raised her perfectly manicured hand, her movement fluid and graceful. "Richard," she purred, her voice as smooth as silk, "before you continue, I think we should acknowledge that some family members might be emotionally attached to the old house." She turned to me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, a calculated, patronizing gesture. "Eliza, dear, I know you lived here for a time, and we all respect that, but surely you understand that sentimentality can't stand in the way of sound financial decisions. It's simply not practical in today's market." Before I could even formulate a polite, yet firm, response, my cousin Blake, ever the attention seeker, jumped in, his voice cutting through the strained silence. "Speaking of sound financial decisions, has anyone seen my new SL Roadster outside? Just picked it up yesterday. Limited edition, only 20 in North America. Had to pull a few strings, naturally." The not-so-subtle topic change was clearly designed to emphasize the vast, unbridgeable chasm between my perceived financial status and theirs, a blatant display of his own superficial wealth. "Very nice, Blake." Richard nodded approvingly, a tight, appreciative smile on his face. "That's exactly the kind of statement piece that reinforces our family's position in the community, our standing." He then smoothly continued with his presentation, outlining a meticulous, cold-blooded plan to sell the mansion, divide the proceeds among family shareholders, weighted by current holdings. Naturally, he added, a subtle dig at my minimal share, and then, to add insult to injury, develop ultra-luxury condominiums on the now vacant property. The developers in the back row, sensing their moment, began distributing glossy, lavish brochures showing detailed renderings of glass and steel structures, bearing absolutely no resemblance to the warm, brick home that had sheltered generations of our family. The home that embodied our true legacy. The projected return on investment is substantial, Richard concluded triumphantly, gesturing grandly at the futuristic renderings. "Any questions before we move to preliminary voting?" I raised my hand, my palm slightly damp. Richard acknowledged me with barely concealed impatience, a curt nod that clearly signaled his desire to rush through this formality. "I think we should consider Grandma Elizabeth's wishes," I said, my voice steady despite the frantic pounding of my heart against my ribs. She specifically wanted this house preserved as our family gathering place and historical anchor. She told me many times that not everything should be measured by its potential return on investment. Some things have intrinsic value beyond mere profit. Uncle Richard's tight smile vanished, his lips thinning into a hard line. While Elizabeth had many admirable qualities, Eliza, the market has changed considerably since her time. What made sense then doesn't necessarily make sense now. We must adapt. Aunt Catherine tittered, a thin, dismissive sound that grated on my nerves. Besides, Eliza, with your limited experience in high-value real estate, perhaps this isn't an area where your input carries much weight. No offense, dear, but you simply don't understand the complexities of these transactions. I persisted, unwilling to be silenced. I have, in fact, analyzed the property values and neighborhood trends thoroughly. This location's historical value actually increases its worth as a preserved property, as a unique legacy, rather than being demolished for yet another generic luxury development that might sit half-empty, like the Westbrook project did last year. The room fell silent for a tense moment, the only sound the rustle of papers as cousins pretended to be engrossed in the brochures. Then, Brad gave a short, dismissive laugh, a sneering sound that cut through the silence. Analysis. What would you know about real estate, Eliza? You can't even afford a house of your own. You're still renting that little apartment downtown, aren't you? Still driving that old Toyota. Don't pretend you're some financial wizard. Several cousins snickered, poorly concealing their amusement, and I felt a familiar, uncomfortable heat rise to my cheeks, but I refused to let it show on my face. My housing choices are deliberate, Brad, not limitations. I replied, my voice even, though my jaw was clenched tight. But Brad, caught up in his self-righteous superiority, talked right over me, his voice oozing condescension. Sure they are, Eliza, just like my choice to drive $150,000 car instead of a 10-year. Old Toyota is deliberate. Some of us can afford our choices, cousin. Others just pretend their limitations are choices. Richard cleared his throat, not to defend me, but merely to move the discussion along, clearly bored with the personal attack. Let's take a preliminary vote on the concept of selling and redeveloping. We can address specific proposals after lunch. The vote, as Jessica had grimly predicted, was overwhelmingly in favor of selling, a crushing affirmation of Uncle Richard's control. Only Jessica and I raised our hands in opposition, two solitary dissenting voices against a tide of self-interest. As we broke for lunch, I felt a crushing weight of disappointment settle over me, heavy and suffocating. It wasn't just about losing the house, although that pain was sharp and real. It was the stark, undeniable realization that my family truly saw me as nothing more than the poor relation, someone whose opinion held absolutely no value. No weight, simply because my bank account, or rather, my as-declared bank account, didn't impress them. Jessica found me in the garden during the lunch break, sitting on the cold stone bench where Grandma Elizabeth used to tell me stories about our family's vibrant history, stories of foresight and integrity that felt so distant from the current reality. "I'm sorry, Eliza," she said, her voice soft with genuine sympathy as she sat beside me. "They can be such snobs. It's truly infuriating." I nodded, fighting back the unshed tears that pricked at my eyes, a burning sensation behind my eyelids. "It's not even about the money, Jess," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "It's that they've never once bothered to ask what I actually do with my life, or why I make the choices I make. They just assume I'm struggling, that I'm failing to keep up, that I'm a permanent charity case. They've defined me without ever knowing me." Jessica squeezed my hand, her touch a comforting anchor. "For what it's worth, Eliza, I've always admired how you've charted your own path, how you don't need to show off all the time. There's something truly admirable about that kind of quiet strength." I smiled gratefully, a fragile, trembling smile, but the morning's raw confrontation had left a deeper wound than I had anticipated. All these years, I had diligently told myself that my family's shallow opinion didn't matter, that I was building something meaningful and substantial, regardless of their approval or lack thereof. But their casual cruelty, their easy dismissal, still hurt in ways I hadn't fully anticipated, cutting right to the core. As we walked slowly back toward the house, Jessica lowered her voice, a conspiratorial whisper. "Just so you know, tomorrow's session will be worse. Much worse. Everyone has to present their personal financial highlights for the year. Richard always structures it to emphasize who's contributing most to the family prestige, and who is, by implication, falling behind." I nodded grimly, a wave of dread washing over me. "Thanks for the warning, Jess. I appreciate it." That evening at dinner, the conversation, predictable in its self-absorption, revolved almost exclusively around which luxury amenities should be included in the new condominium development that would replace our beloved family home. As I listened to them animatedly debate between sprawling infinity pools or intimate private rooftop gardens, between imported Italian marble or exquisite French limestone finishes, I realized with a stark clarity how fundamentally different our values had become. There was no common ground, no shared understanding of what truly mattered. While I sat silently contemplating the growing, almost unbridgeable divide between my family and me, I couldn't help but wonder if there would ever be a bridge across it, or if, perhaps, I even wanted there to be one anymore. The thought was both liberating and profoundly sad. Sunday morning's session, the true heart and mate of our annual family conference, focused exclusively on inheritance matters and detailed property holdings. The grand drawing room had been painstakingly rearranged overnight. The previous day's casual seating arrangement, replaced by a long, imposing mahogany table, polished to a gleam that reflected the morning light. Uncle Richard, ever the showman, took his accustomed position at the head of the table, an aura of self-importance surrounding him. At each setting, a heavy, embossed leather portfolio lay, awaiting review. Mine, I couldn't help but notice, was markedly thinner, lighter, a stark visual representation of my perceived and carefully cultivated financial insignificance. Today we'll review our individual and collective holdings. Richard announced, his voice resonating with authority, once everyone was seated. As you know, our family voting structure is weighted by contribution to overall assets. It's a system that ensures efficiency and progress. I've taken the liberty of preparing an updated assessment for everyone. He nodded to his impeccably dressed assistant, who then distributed fresh spreadsheets, each detailing a specific family member's declared assets and their corresponding voting power. As expected, Richard himself controlled a commanding 38% of the total votes, with his children and siblings holding most of the remainder, effectively giving them absolute control. My own voting share was listed at a mere 2%, reflecting only the small inheritance from Grandma that I had publicly acknowledged, plus my modest, deliberately understated salary as a financial consultant, and my deliberately vague job title. Before we begin individual presentations, Richard continued, his eyes sweeping over the table. I'd like to propose some adjustments to the distribution framework established in Elizabeth's will. This caught my attention immediately. A sudden jolt of alarm. Grandma's meticulously drafted will had included some crucial protection mechanisms, safeguards designed to prevent any single family member from gaining too much control or concentrating too much power. Richard was now suggesting streamlining these protections for administrative efficiency. The proposed changes would, in effect, consolidate even more power with the wealthiest family members, particularly himself. As family members, lulled by years of Richard's self-serving rhetoric, nodded along in agreement, I carefully noted each suggested modification, each subtle shift in language. These, I knew, would be crucial details to discuss with Mr. Winters later, details that could have far-reaching implications. After the inheritance discussion, which concluded with a unanimous vote in favor of Richard's proposed streamlining, a vote that was a foregone conclusion, we moved to the individual financial updates. Brad predictably went first. He stood with an almost comical arrogance, proudly describing his new position as vice president in Uncle Richard's company, a title he'd acquired through sheer nepotism, rather than merit. He boasted about the astronomical bonuses he'd received, the dazzling performance of his portfolio of luxury investments, and then, with a smug, self-satisfied flourish, he concluded, and of course there's the new vacation property in Aspen. Closed on it last month. 4 bedrooms, ski-in, ski-out access, and a hot tub overlooking the mountains. A true investment, wouldn't you say? Next came Blake, equally boastful, detailing his supposedly groundbreaking tech startup investments and the yacht he'd recently upgraded, because the last one just wasn't quite big enough for proper entertaining. Victoria, in her turn, meticulously detailed her vastly expanded art collection, acquired with discerning taste, and the spots she'd secured for her children at a notoriously exclusive private school, despite its 5-year waiting list. They made an exception for the Bennett name, of course, she added, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. One by one, my relatives outlined their expanding wealth, their glittering status symbols, and their meticulously curated lives of leisure and luxury. Each presentation was met with appreciative nods, murmurs of admiration, and follow-up questions designed to elicit even more lavish details. When Taylor mentioned struggling to find reliable household staff for her 3 sprawling homes, Aunt Catherine immediately leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with a mixture of concern and social superiority, offering contacts for the best agency for domestic help. They only work with certain families, but I'll put in a word for you, dear. The conversation eventually, and inevitably, turned to the luxury apartment complex, where several family members lived, the very building I secretly owned. The amenities are top-notch, Victoria commented, her voice casual. But the management has been making some changes I don't particularly care for. They've been renovating the lobby, disrupting everyone with construction noise. It's simply unacceptable. Blake nodded vigorously in agreement, his face a mask of indignation. And they raised the rent last quarter! Not significantly, mind you, but still, on principle. Who do they think they are? Don't they know who their tenants are? Brad leaned forward, his eyes narrowing thoughtfully. You know what's strange? No one seems to know who actually owns the building now. It was purchased by some holding company last year. Very mysterious. Almost like they don't want to be found. Uncle Richard tapped his pen thoughtfully against his leather portfolio, a speculative gleam in his eye. Perhaps we should leverage some family connections to find out who's behind the purchase. If it's some obscure investment group, they might be persuaded to sell to us instead. The location is prime, and having family control would certainly benefit those of you living there. I maintained a neutral, almost impassive expression, though my heart raced with a mixture of disbelief and growing indignation. They were so casually discussing using their considerable influence, their connections, their power to pressure the mystery owner, me, into selling against my wishes, simply because it suited their convenience. We could apply some pressure through the right channels. Richard continued, completely unaware of the irony of his words. I know people at the city planning office who could make approvals for their future renovations. Challenging, very challenging, the casual, almost flippant way. They discussed using their powerful connections to essentially bully a property owner made my blood boil. This was exactly the kind of entitled, self-serving behavior Grandma Elizabeth had always criticized. The misuse of family power not to create value, not to do good, but to seize it from others, to bend rules to their own advantage. And Eliza, Brad added with a smug smirk, turning to me, his eyes full of condescension. This is how real estate actually works in the real world. Not that you'd understand, since you can't even afford your own place. Still renting that tiny apartment downtown, right? The room fell silent for a moment before uncomfortable, poorly suppressed laughter broke out. When my turn finally came, late in the afternoon, after hours of listening to their self-congratulatory narratives, I presented a deliberately understated summary of my consulting work and my modest, carefully managed investment growth. As I spoke, a familiar scene unfolded around me. Brad checked his phone, Victoria whispered conspiratorially to her husband, and Uncle Richard impatiently tapped his pen against his portfolio, clearly signaling his disinterest. No one asked follow-up questions. No one showed even a flicker of genuine interest in my careful financial strategy. Instead, Aunt Catherine seized the very first pause in my presentation to ask, her voice dripping with artificial concern, "Dear, have you ever considered a career change? Surely there must be something more substantial you could pursue, Eliza, with the Bennett name behind you." something that truly reflects our family's standing. The condescension in her tone was unmistakable, a thinly veiled insult. Before I could respond, Brad interjected with a smirk, "Maybe she just needs to marry well." "That's still a valid strategy. Right, Aunt Catherine." The room filled with poorly concealed laughter, a chorus of dismissal. I felt my cheeks burning, but I kept my expression composed, a mask of calm. "I'm quite satisfied with my current path, Aunt Catherine," I replied evenly, my voice unwavering. Not everyone measures success by the same metrics. Uncle Richard cleared his throat, not to defend me, but to smoothly transition to his next point, a point designed to further humiliate me. "Well, speaking of different metrics, I think we should discuss a special provision for family members who might need additional support." He didn't look directly at me, but every single person in the room knew precisely who he meant. The Bennett family has always taken care of its own, and perhaps we should formalize a structure for those who haven't been as fortunate in their financial endeavors. A safety net, so to speak. The humiliation of being openly discussed as a charity case, as a recipient of their magnanimous pity, was almost unbearable. I sat rigidly in my chair, my hands clasped so tightly under the table that my knuckles turned white, listening with a detached horror as they debated how to help me, how to structure this family assistance program, all without actually consulting me about what I might need or want. It was an insult wrapped in the guise of generosity. Later that evening, the humiliation still stinging, I escaped to the sanctuary of my room and immediately called Mr. Winters, my trusted attorney and advisor. "They're planning to change Grandma's will provisions," I explained, my voice tight with controlled anger, detailing the proposed modifications and the strategic erosion of Grandma's safeguards. "And they're talking about investigating the ownership of Victoria's building, of my building. They want to force the owner to sell." "Mr. Winters chuckled softly on the other end of the line, a comforting, knowing sound. "I anticipated something like this, Eliza. Don't worry. Your ownership structure is completely secure and anonymous. Multiple corporate layers protect your identity. It would take a significant legal effort and an improbable amount of luck for them to trace it back to you." I sighed, looking out the window at the familiar garden, now silvered by the ethereal glow of moonlight. "It's not just about keeping my investment secret anymore," I said, my voice quiet, reflective. "They're planning to sell Grandma's house, the very heart of her legacy. And the way they talk about using family connections to pressure people, to bend rules in their favor, to outright bully. It's everything she despised, everything she warned me against. Elizabeth would be profoundly proud of how you've honored her real values, Eliza," Mr. Winters said gently, his voice unwavering. "What do you want to do now? We have options." I thought for a long, quiet moment, watching a lone cloud drift lazily across the face of the moon, momentarily eclipsing its light. A new resolve, cold and clear as mountain spring water, began to crystallize within me. I finally said, my voice steady, infused with a newfound determination that replaced the raw hurt I'd felt earlier. "It's time to prepare my full portfolio documentation. Can you courier over the complete ownership records for all properties, including the apartment complex? Everything." "Are you sure, Eliza?" he asked cautiously, his tone betraying a hint of concern. "Once you reveal your holdings, there's no going back. Your life will change irrevocably." "I'm sure," I replied, the words ringing with certainty. "They've underestimated me for the last time. Tomorrow, Mr. Winters, I'll show them exactly who they've been dismissing all these years, and who the true heir to Grandma Elizabeth's legacy truly is." Monday morning dawned with a palpable sense of foreboding, a quiet hum of nervous energy in the grand mansion. I prepared for the final, decisive day of our annual family conference. Today, each family member would present their detailed financial statements and investment strategies. the portion of our annual gathering that had always been meticulously designed to highlight the vast, unbridgeable gap between my relatives' extravagant wealth and my supposedly modest means. I dressed even more carefully than usual, choosing a simple but elegant black dress I'd purchased on sale at Nordstrom last year, a quiet statement of confidence, and paired it with my mother's delicate pearl earrings. The only jewelry I ever wore to these events, a tangible connection to the genuine values of my parents. The family had already gathered in the stately library by the time I arrived, the antique mahogany table now, covered with an array of gleaming laptops, sleek tablets, and expensive leather portfolios, each embossed with the distinctive Bennett family crest. Uncle Richard, ever the orchestrator, began by reiterating the importance of maintaining family standards, a phrase that always felt like a coded jab at me. He then introduced a new, deliberately confrontational element to our usual proceedings, a comparison chart, displayed prominently on the projector screen, showing each family member's net worth growth over the past 5 years. The bar graph, an undeniable visual representation, showed his own towering achievement in deep navy blue, followed by substantial columns for his children and siblings, impressive in their declared financial heft. My own contribution, however, appeared as a barely visible sliver at the far end of the chart, almost an afterthought, a testament to my carefully constructed anonymity. "As you can see," he said with a thin, almost cruel smile directed precisely at me, "some of us have embraced the Bennett legacy of financial acumen more successfully than others. Some of us truly understand how to grow wealth, how to leverage the family name." Several family members chuckled, the sound brittle and dismissive, and I noticed Brad nudging Victoria. As they both glanced at me with poorly disguised amusement, their faces a tableau of smug satisfaction. The individual presentations began with Uncle Richard himself, who, with characteristic theatricality, detailed his relentlessly expanding commercial real estate empire, his recent audacious acquisitions in emerging markets, and his ambitious plans for developing a new ultra-luxury hotel chain. My cousins followed, each with equally impressive displays of their financial prowess. Brad's staggering executive compensation package, Victoria's husband's meteoric hedge fund successes, Blake's tech investments that had apparently doubled, even tripled, in value overnight. Each presentation received thoughtful questions, appreciative murmurs, and suggestions for further growth opportunities, a collective back-patting ritual of the financially elite. When my turn finally came, the energy in the room visibly deflated, a palpable shift in atmosphere. Several relatives, their faces betraying their boredom, immediately reached for their phones, while others began quiet side conversations, their voices hushed but audible. I began my prepared summary of modest consulting projects and small, incremental investment growth, adhering strictly to the understated script I'd maintained for years, a shield against their judgment. Uncle Richard checked his watch repeatedly, a subtle but unmistakable gesture, making it clear he considered this a mere formality, not worth his full attention or respect. Halfway through my presentation, Aunt Catherine interrupted with a heavy, dramatic sigh. "Eliza, dear," she said, her voice dripping with feigned concern, "I don't mean to be unkind, but it's truly painful watching you live so far below your potential, year after year. The Bennett name should count for something, yet you seem determined to, well, struggle. It's almost willful." The room fell silent as all eyes turned to me, a collective gaze of judgment. I kept my expression neutral, my face a carefully composed mask. "I wouldn't characterize my life as struggling, Aunt Catherine. I'm quite comfortable with my choices and content with the path I've chosen." Brad snorted, a derisive sound. "Comfortable in that tiny apartment with your second-hand furniture and 10-year-old car. Eliza, let's be honest, you're the poor relation. We all know it. There's no use pretending." More laughter, less restrained now, rippled through the room. Some of us, Brad continued, warming to his cruel topic, are actually building on the family legacy, expanding it. Others are just coasting on the minimum grandma left them, barely keeping their heads above water. The casual cruelty of his words hit harder than I expected. Despite years of their condescension, being openly mocked, directly and unambiguously, still cut deeply, a raw wound. Uncle Richard cleared his throat, not to defend me, but to smoothly transition to his next planned humiliation. Perhaps this is a good time to discuss the family assistance program I mentioned yesterday. Eliza, he said, his voice laced with patronizing concern. There's no shame in accepting help when needed. We could establish a monthly stipend to help you maintain a more appropriate lifestyle for someone with our family name, to ease your burdens. The suggestion that I, who was worth more than several of them combined, needed their charity, their handout, was the final, undeniable straw. But I maintained my composure, years of practice hiding my true feelings serving me well. That won't be necessary, Uncle Richard, I said evenly, my voice devoid of any emotion, but thank you for your concern. If my presentation is concluded, I'll step out for some air before lunch. As soon as the library door closed behind me, I rushed upstairs, to the sanctuary of my room, my hands trembling with a mixture of raw rage and overwhelming hurt. Alone, finally, I allowed the tears to fall, hot and stinging, not from financial insecurity, for I had long since transcended that, but from the painful, agonizing recognition that my family had never truly seen me, not once. They'd created a convenient, dismissive narrative about who I was, without ever bothering to look beyond their superficial assumptions or their own narrow, status-obsessed worldview. I moved to the window seat, where Grandma and I used to sit together, looking out over the garden she'd loved so much, its vibrant colors now blurred by my tears. What would you do now, Grandma? I whispered, as if she might somehow answer from the ether. In the quiet of the room, surrounded by cherished memories of the one family member who had truly valued me, truly seen my potential, I felt a profound shift inside, a hardening resolve replacing the raw, aching hurt. This mansion, this legacy, was as much mine as it was theirs, and I had honored it, cultivated it, in ways they couldn't even begin to comprehend. A soft knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. Martha, the housekeeper, entered with a concerned expression, her kind eyes immediately noticing my tear-streaked face. Miss Eliza, she said gently, her voice full of genuine warmth, I brought you some tea. I noticed you left the meeting rather quickly. Her simple, thoughtful gesture brought fresh tears to my eyes. Martha had been with the family for decades, and unlike my relatives, she had always treated me with unwavering kindness, with true respect. They still see me as that orphaned teenager who needed charity. Martha, I said, accepting the teacup with a grateful, trembling hand. No matter what I do, no matter what I achieve, I'll always be the poor relation to them, the one to be pitied. Martha sat beside me, her weathered hands smoothing her apron. A gesture I remembered from my childhood, a prelude to her thoughtful words. Your grandmother used to say that wealth makes some people's vision very poor. She said quietly, her voice laced with wisdom. They can only see what shines brightest right in front of them, what screams of status. They can't see what holds true, quiet value. She paused, her gaze distant, then added, Miss Elizabeth would be so proud, Eliza. So proud of how you've honored her teachings. She always said you were the only one who really understood what the Bennett legacy should mean, the true heart of it. Hearing this validation from someone who had known my grandmother intimately, someone who truly understood her values, provided an unexpected, profound comfort. Thank you, Martha, I said, my voice thick with emotion. That means more than you know. She patted my hand before standing. The package you were expecting arrived while you were in the meeting, she said, her eyes twinkling. I put it on your desk. My heart leaped with a sudden surge of anticipation. Mr. Winters had sent the documentation I requested. "Thank you, Martha," I said again, with renewed purpose, the tears now gone, replaced by a steely resolve. After Martha left, I eagerly opened the courier package and spread the contents across my bed. Property deeds, complex corporate ownership structures, meticulously detailed portfolio valuations, and most importantly, the irrefutable documentation proving my anonymous ownership of the sprawling luxury apartment complex where Victoria, Blake, and 3 other family members currently lived. I traced my finger over the official seal on the title deed, feeling a strange, potent mixture of vindication and a quiet sadness. Tomorrow, I had planned to reveal my true financial position, to stun them into silence. But after today's raw, public humiliation, I questioned whether I even wanted these people, these superficial, judgmental relatives, in my life anymore. Did I really need the hollow validation of family members who had shown me nothing but condescension, casual cruelty, and dismissal for decades? As I carefully gathered the documents, organizing them, memories flooded back, clear and poignant. Grandma Elizabeth, patiently teaching me to read complex financial statements at this very desk, explaining that true wealth wasn't about displaying status or acquiring more glittering baubles, but about creating security, fostering independence, and seizing opportunities to effect positive change. The Bennett name used to mean something more than showing off. Eliza, she told me once, her voice firm. It meant integrity, foresight, and using privilege responsibly, for the good of others, not just for personal gain. In that profound moment, looking at the tangible evidence of how faithfully I'd followed her guidance, how meticulously I'd honored her true legacy, I made my decision, solid and unwavering. I wasn't going to reveal my success simply to win their approval or their belated respect. I would do it to honor Grandma's true legacy, to solidify what she stood for, and to establish, once and for all, that I wasn't merely a footnote in the Bennett family story, a struggling charity case. I was in fact its future, its true continuation, whether they recognized it or not. The afternoon session began with a renewed, almost desperate energy as Uncle Richard, sensing a need to regain control of the narrative, shifted the discussion to addressing concerns about tenant relations in the luxury apartment complex where Victoria, Blake, and several other family members resided. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me as I took my seat, my documents tucked securely in my portfolio, listening to my family complain vociferously about property management decisions I had personally approved. The new security system installation has been incredibly disruptive, Victoria complained, tossing her perfectly highlighted hair with an exaggerated sigh. The contractors start at 9 in the morning. 9! As if anyone should have to hear construction noises during breakfast. It's simply uncivilized. Blake nodded vigorously, his face a picture of righteous indignation. And they've implemented this new guest registration policy. That's completely unnecessary. I had to actually register my housekeeper as a recurring visitor. Do they not understand who we are? The caliber of tenants they have? Richard leaned forward, steepling his fingers in the authoritative gesture he'd adopted after Grandma's passing, a pose he hoped conveyed gravitas. This is exactly why family control of key properties is essential. When buildings change hands, new management doesn't understand the nuanced needs of prestigious tenants like yourselves. They fail to cater to the standards we expect. I bit my tongue, fighting to maintain my composure as they continued their litany of complaints, knowing full well that the security upgrades had been implemented after a serious break in 2 floors below Victoria's unit, and the guest policy followed multiple complaints from other residents about unidentified people accessing amenity areas, compromising safety. My improvements had actually increased the building's value by 12% in the past year, making it even more desirable. Though of course they saw only the minor inconveniences, the tiny disruptions to their privileged lives. I've had Jenkins look into the ownership structure. Richard continued, referring to his personal attorney, his voice radiating quiet confidence. The building was purchased by Horizon Holdings last year, which is owned by Summit Investments, which appears to be controlled by some offshore entity. Deliberately obscure, which suggests they might be vulnerable to the right kind of pressure. They clearly don't want their identity known. The calculated, almost gleeful way he discussed leveraging family connections to essentially bully the owner me made something snap inside. Still, I maintained my calm exterior, years of practice serving me well. "What kind of pressure, Uncle Richard?" I asked innocently, my voice soft, almost curious. Richard smiled, not noticing the dangerous edge, the quiet steel in my voice. "There are always approval processes that can be expedited or delayed, depending on relationships with the right officials. Plus, with 5 Bennett family members as tenants, we represent a significant portion of their premium units. A coordinated approach could make continued ownership uncomfortable for them. Very uncomfortable." Brad chuckled, a cruel, knowing sound. "Not to mention if we found code violations or tax irregularities. Our friends at the city assessor's office might suddenly become very interested in auditing their properties. It's amazing what a little due diligence can uncover." I watched in disbelief, a cold fury building within me, as my family casually discussed using their considerable influence, their connections, their unearned power, to essentially harass a property owner into selling against their will. It was a textbook example of the entitled, morally bankrupt behavior Grandma Elizabeth had always criticized, the very antithesis of responsible stewardship. "And Eliza," Brad added, his voice dripping with condescension, turning to me with a smug smirk. "This is how real estate actually works in the real world. Not that you'd understand, since you can't even afford your own place. Still renting that tiny apartment downtown, right? Still driving that old Toyota." The room fell silent for a moment before an uncomfortable, nervous laughter broke out, quickly suppressed. It wasn't just the mockery that infuriated me now. It was the casual corruption they embraced, the flagrant disregard for ethics, all while claiming to uphold the sacred Bennett legacy. Speaking of real estate, Richard smoothly transitioned, sensing the shift in the room. "Let's finalize our decision about this property." He gestured around at the grand mansion. "The Westbrook Development Group has presented an excellent offer, and the projected returns from converting to luxury condominiums would benefit all shareholders immensely. It's simply the most fiscally responsible path." I raised my hand, determined to make one last, desperate attempt at preserving Grandma's home, her true monument. "Before we vote, I'd like to propose an alternative," I said, my voice clear and unwavering. "This house has historical and sentimental value far beyond its mere real estate potential. What if we converted it into a Bennett Family Foundation headquarters? We could preserve the architecture, honor the historical integrity, while simultaneously creating something that truly honors Grandma's legacy of community investment, of using wealth for good." Richard's expression made it immediately clear that he'd already dismissed the idea, even before I had finished speaking. "While that's a creative suggestion, Eliza, the financial return would be minimal, if not negative, compared to development. We have to be practical about these assets. We can't afford to be sentimental." Aunt Catherine nodded vigorously. "Besides, a foundation would require considerable ongoing management, considerable time and effort. Some of us," she glanced meaningfully at me, "might have time for such projects. But those of us actively growing the family fortune have other, more pressing priorities." The vote that followed was a painful formality, a crushing defeat. With Richard controlling nearly 40% of the votes, and his unwavering allies another 45%. My 2% and Jessica's 5% made absolutely no difference. The decision to sell Grandma's beloved home and replace it with soulless luxury condominiums passed with overwhelming, self-serving support, as Richard, with a grim efficiency, outlined the timeline for vacating the property and beginning demolition. I felt a strange, unsettling calm settle over me. This wasn't just about a house anymore. It was about the very soul of our family, the core values that had been abandoned, trampled underfoot in the relentless, shallow pursuit of status and material display. Later that evening, the mansion silent except for the creaks and groans of an old house settling into its fate, I called Mr. Winters from the privacy of my room. They voted to sell the mansion. I told him, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. Looking out at the rose garden, where Grandma had taught me about patient investing and true value, about waiting for the right moment. And they're planning to use family connections to pressure the mystery owner of Victoria's building into selling. They're going to use leverage. Mr. Winters chuckled softly on the other end of the line, a dry, knowing sound. They have no idea who they're dealing with, do they, Eliza? Absolutely no idea. He paused. Are you still planning to reveal yourself tomorrow? I watched the sunset painting Grandma's roses in shades of molten gold and deep crimson, a final fairy farewell. Yes, I said, my voice firm with renewed resolve. But I need your help with something else first. Can you prepare documents transferring my ownership of Bennett Capital Holdings to a new entity, one that would allow me to purchase this property, the mansion, before they can sell it to developers, before Richard can sign any contracts? There was a brief, pregnant pause on the line before he replied, his voice laced with admiration. Elizabeth always said, "You are the one who truly understood the meaning of legacy, Eliza. I'll have everything ready for the morning. What name do you want for the new entity?" I smiled, a small, knowing smile, remembering Grandma's favorite quote about wealth being a tool, not a trophy, about its true purpose. Call it Elizabeth's Legacy Trust, I said, the name a silent tribute. After ending the call, I spent hours reviewing the complete, intricate documentation of my holdings, meticulously preparing for the revelation that would forever change my relationship with my family. The raw hurt and simmering anger I'd felt earlier had crystallized into something far more powerful, more potent and absolute. Unwavering clarity about who I was, what I stood for, and the values I truly represented. Whether they accepted me or not, whether they approved or not, no longer mattered. I was a Bennett in the ways that truly counted, in the ways that Grandma had taught me, and tomorrow they would finally, irrevocably, understand exactly what that meant. That night, alone in my childhood bedroom, the moonlight casting long shadows across the familiar furniture, I spread all my portfolio documents across the bed, organizing them meticulously for tomorrow's revelation. The complete picture was impressive, even to me, who had built it piece by painstaking piece. Property deeds, complex corporate ownership structures, meticulously audited investment accounts, and comprehensive financial statements showing a net worth that would undoubtedly shock my status, obsessed family into stunned silence. 15 properties in total, 3 commercial buildings, strategically located in rapidly developing urban areas, 12 residential properties in prime, appreciating locations, and of course, the luxury apartment complex, where several family members currently resided, blissfully unaware of their landlord's identity. My total assets exceeded $73 million, more than Brad Blake and Victoria combined, and significantly more than Uncle Richard's declared holdings. I organized everything into a sleek, professional leather portfolio I'd purchased specifically for this moment, one that, ironically, matched the expensive, ostentatious ones my cousins carried to family meetings. The irony wasn't lost on me, that this was the first time I'd ever consciously spent money on appearance, rather than pure substance. But tomorrow was about making a statement they couldn't ignore, a visual and financial declaration. As I worked, Memories flooded back, warm and vivid, of Grandma sitting with me in this very room, patiently teaching me her philosophy of patient wealth building, of quiet growth. "The problem with showing off your money, Eliza," she'd said, her voice soft but firm, "is that you're always spending instead of growing. You're constantly trying to impress, and that means you're not truly building. True wealth isn't about displaying status, it's about creating security and opportunity, about laying foundations that will last for generations." I remembered how she'd taught me to analyze neighborhood development patterns, to identify properties with long-term appreciation potential, rather than immediate prestige value, to look for the diamond in the rough. While my cousins were buying luxury condos in already established, glamorous neighborhoods, I diligently followed Grandma's advice, looking for overlooked areas on the cusp of revitalization, places where value could be quietly nurtured. My very first purchase, a modest duplex in a neighborhood that other, more conventional investors had dismissed as transitional, a polite term for not yet gentrified enough for our standards, was a direct application of her teaching. I'd lived in one unit, carefully renovating it myself after my full-time job, and rented out the other, using the income to offset my mortgage while property values steadily climbed, unnoticed by the wider market. 2 years later, I sold it for nearly double my initial investment, and shrewdly rolled the profits into 2 more properties, continuing the pattern of living simply, anonymously, while my portfolio expanded in stealth. The apartment complex had been my biggest gamble, investing nearly every liquid asset I had into a single, yet strategically vital property. But the location was unbeatable, and my meticulous analysis showed strong appreciation potential with relatively minor, targeted upgrades. Using the labyrinthine LC structures Mr. Winters had helped establish, I'd maintained complete anonymity as the owner, implementing improvements that increased both the building's value and, despite what my complaining cousins might believe, tenant satisfaction. I pulled out the original handwritten investment journal Grandma had given me when I turned 18, a simple, leather-bound book with blank pages waiting to be filled. The very first entry, in my nascent, teenage handwriting, detailed the humble $500 I'd invested in a mutual fund she'd recommended. Page after page chronicled my quiet, determined journey. First small stock purchases, then increasingly sophisticated investment decisions, all meticulously following her core principles of patience, diligent research, and focusing on intrinsic value over fleeting flash. I traced my finger over her neat annotations in the margins, her wisdom guiding me even when she was no longer there to advise me directly. Excellent analysis, Eliza. Or, consider the 10-year potential, not the 2-year return. These notes had been my compass, my silent mentor. My phone chimed softly, a text message from Mr. Winters. "Al documents prepared as requested. Elizabeth's legacy trust established. Ready to proceed at your signal tomorrow." I texted back my sincere thanks, then continued organizing my portfolio, making sure every document was arranged for maximum, undeniable impact. This wasn't just about revealing my financial success. It was about honoring Grandma's true legacy of thoughtful stewardship, quiet strength, and profound integrity. Around midnight, a soft knock at my door surprised me. Jessica stood in the hallway, her face etched with genuine concern. "Just checking if you're okay," she said, her voice soft. "You were very quiet at dinner, and you left the meeting so abruptly." I hesitated for a moment, then stepped aside to let her in, quickly gathering the myriad documents spread across my bed. Her eyes widened as she glimpsed the property deeds and financial statements, a mixture of disbelief and curiosity on her face. "Eliza, what is all this?" I trusted Jessica more than anyone else in the family, but I'd kept my secret for too long, too meticulously, to reveal it casually now. "Just preparing for tomorrow," I said vaguely, hoping to buy myself a little more time. But Jessica, with an intuitive grace, spotted a folder I'd missed, the one containing the irrefutable documentation of my ownership of the luxury apartment complex where she, along with Victoria and Blake, lived. Her jaw literally dropped as she read the title deed, her eyes scanning the official language. "You," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You're the mysterious owner they've been complaining about. You're the one they want to pressure into selling." I nodded slowly, a wave of immense relief washing over me, at finally sharing my monumental secret with someone who might genuinely understand, who wouldn't immediately judge. "Please don't tell them yet," I pleaded softly. "I'm planning to reveal everything tomorrow publicly, to the whole family." Jessica sank onto the window seat, shaking her head in stunned disbelief, a bewildered smile playing on her lips. "All these years," she mused, her voice full of wonder, "they've been treating you like the struggling poor relation, the charity case, and you've been, what, a secret millionaire, an actual real estate mogul." I smiled at her astonishment, a genuine, unburdened smile. I followed Grandma's advice about patient investing and living below my means. The less they noticed me, the more freely I could operate without family interference, without their mentoring, without their judgment. Jessica laughed softly, a genuine, delighted sound. "Brad is going to have an absolute heart attack. He was just saying tonight that someone should explain basic real estate principles to you, so you could at least afford a decent car." Her expression then turned serious, her eyes meeting mine with profound understanding. "Are you sure you want to do this, Eliza? Once they know, once the truth is out, everything will change. They'll either resent you bitterly, or suddenly become your best friends, desperate for your connections, your capital. Neither option is particularly appealing." I joined her on the window seat, looking out at the moonlit garden, the silent witness to my journey. "I don't need their approval anymore, Jess," I said, my voice filled with a quiet strength. "But I do need to honor Grandma's legacy. This real legacy, not the distorted, shallow version Uncle Richard has created." I explained my comprehensive plan to purchase the mansion through Elizabeth's Legacy Trust before Richard could sell it to rapacious developers. Jessica squeezed my hand, a silent gesture of unwavering support. "She would be so proud of you, Eliza," she whispered. "I'll be right beside you tomorrow, every step of the way." After she left, I laid out what I would wear for the final confrontation. A simple but perfectly tailored charcoal suit I'd purchased from a small, elegant boutique in New York last year, but had saved for a truly special occasion. Nothing flashy or designer labeled, no overt symbols of wealth, but quietly elegant in a way that truly reflected my actual values, rather than the family's obsession with obvious status symbols. I also carefully selected my grandmother's simple pearl necklace, the one piece of family jewelry I'd inherited, a subtle but powerful symbol of her enduring belief in understated elegance and quiet strength. As I finally prepared for bed, I felt strangely calm, a profound sense of peace settling over me. Tomorrow would change everything, but I was ready. The frightened, insecure orphan who had once accepted their condescension and pity was gone, vanished. In her place stood a woman who had meticulously built something substantial, something truly meaningful, with quiet determination and unwavering integrity. I was honoring the true Bennett values, not of displaying wealth ostentatiously, but of creating it thoughtfully, of nurturing it wisely, and of using it purposefully for good. Whatever happened tomorrow, whatever their reactions, I would face it knowing that the person who had truly understood what the Bennett legacy should mean, the person who had loved me unconditionally, would be standing with me in spirit. "Watch me tomorrow, Grandma," I whispered to the moonlit room, a silent promise. "I think you'll be proud." Tuesday morning arrived with a crystalline clarity, a crisp, clean light that seemed fitting for the day of reckoning. I dressed with deliberate care in my perfectly tailored charcoal suit, feeling the quiet strength it imbued. I fastened Grandma's simple pearl necklace around my neck, its cool weight a comforting presence, and added the pearl studs that had belonged to my mother. Looking in the mirror, I saw not the poor relation my family had dismissed for years, the charity case they pitied. I saw a woman of substance, of quiet purpose, of unwavering strength. For the first time, I applied a touch of vibrant red lipstick, not to impress them, but as a silent, internal war paint for the battle ahead. I arrived at the conference room 10 minutes early, a strategic move. I placed my sleek leather portfolio precisely at my usual, unassuming seat at the far end of the table, then stepped out into the hallway for a moment, taking a deep, fortifying breath to center myself. When I returned at exactly 9 o'clock, the family had assembled in their usual, hierarchical formation. Uncle Richard, a figure of self-appointed authority, sat at the head of the table, surrounded by his inner circle of sycophants and closest allies, those of lesser standing arranged in descending order of perceived importance. Jessica caught my eye, a subtle, encouraging nod passing between us. "Good. We're all here," Richard began, not bothering to acknowledge my quiet arrival, his gaze already fixed on the agenda. "Today we'll finalize the mansion sale arrangements and discuss the apartment complex situation. Time is of the essence." He gestured to his assistant to distribute folders containing what appeared to be finalized developer contracts. The Westbrook Development Group has offered $48 million for the property, a truly excellent sum, with construction slated to begin next month. Their legal team has prepared the preliminary agreements for all shareholders to sign today. The payouts will be substantial. As the folders circulated around the table, a flurry of rustling paper and excited murmurs. I remained perfectly still, watching the family's eager faces as they reviewed the substantial payouts they would receive, the tangible results of their decision, based on the current, declared shareholding structure. Uncle Richard stood to gain nearly $18 million from the sale, a staggering sum, while my own 2% share would yield less than $1 million. Still significant money, but a mere fraction of what the others, who had done nothing but inherit, would receive. "Now," Richard continued, his voice shifting to a more serious tone, "regarding the apartment complex matter, Jenkins has identified some potential leverage points with the mysterious owner. We've drafted a letter from the family attorney suggesting certain code compliance reviews might be forthcoming. Unless they're willing to discuss a reasonable offer. It's a subtle but effective approach." The casualness with which he described what amounted to calculated legal harassment, a thinly veiled threat, made my blood boil, a hot rush of indignation. But I maintained my composed expression, my face a mask of calm. "Before we move forward with either of these items, Uncle Richard," I said, my voice, to my own surprise, stronger and more confident than it had ever been in a family meeting, cutting through the murmurs. "I'd like to request the floor for a brief presentation of my own." Richard checked his watch impatiently, his brows furrowed. "We have a tight schedule today, Eliza. The developers are expecting our signed agreements by noon. This is not the time for frivolous diversions. This won't take long," I replied, my voice unwavering, standing and moving to the front of the room without waiting for his permission. The unusual, unexpected assertiveness of my movement caused several cousins to exchange surprised glances, a ripple of unease moving through the room. I opened my portfolio, a gesture of quiet defiance, and removed a single document, the most recent, comprehensively audited valuation of my complete holdings. For years, I've listened to assumptions about my financial situation. I began, my gaze sweeping the room, making direct eye contact with each family member in turn, holding their gaze. I've heard the whispers about the poor relation, and endured the condescension, the pity, and occasionally, the outright mockery, Brad shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his face flushing crimson, while Victoria suddenly became intensely interested in her perfectly manicured fingernails, avoiding my gaze. Yesterday, Uncle Richard presented a graph showing each family member's contribution to our collective wealth, to the family's prestige. I think it's time to update that data. I handed the valuation summary to Richard's assistant, a young woman whose eyes widened with curiosity, instructing her to display it on the projector. As the document appeared on screen, stark and undeniable, showing my net worth of $73 million, a stunned, absolute silence fell over the room. It was so profound that I could almost hear the collective intake of breath. "This can't be right." Brad finally sputtered, his face flushing an even deeper, apoplectic red. "There must be some mistake, a typo." I smiled coolly, a slow, deliberate smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. "No mistake, Brad. While you've been buying sports cars and vacation homes, while you've been flaunting your visible wealth, I've been quietly building a real estate portfolio that outperforms most of yours combined. A portfolio built on Grandma's principles. I began distributing copies of my complete financial statement, a thick dossier of pages, enjoying the shocked, disbelieving expressions as family members flipped through pages detailing my extensive, diversified holdings, the sheer scale of which clearly baffled them. "But you live in that small apartment," Aunt Catherine protested weakly, her voice thin with disbelief. "You drive that old Toyota. It's simply not possible." "But choice, Aunt Catherine," I replied, my voice calm, precise, not necessity. Grandma taught me that displaying wealth and building wealth are often opposing goals. I chose to focus on the latter, on substance over show. Uncle Richard had turned an interesting shade of ashen gray as he scrutinized my financial documents, his usual composure utterly shattered. "How did you manage this?" he whispered, his voice hoarse, genuine bewilderment in his eyes. "Without family connections, without our network, without access to capital." The sheer, profound ignorance in his voice almost made me laugh out loud. "I used the principles Grandma taught me," I replied, my voice gaining strength. "About patient investing, identifying undervalued properties with genuine growth potential. The same principles this family seems to have abandoned entirely in favor of flashy developments and status-driven acquisitions. Properties chosen for their perceived prestige, rather than their intrinsic value." I removed another document from my portfolio, this one showing my complete ownership of the luxury apartment complex, the one they had just discussed pressuring. "And regarding the mysterious owner you were planning to pressure and harass," I continued, my voice now laced with a steely, quiet power. Walking around the table to place the document directly in front of Victoria, her eyes widening in horror. "I believe you'll find that you're all, in fact, my tenants." The room erupted in chaos. Blake, startled, knocked over his water glass, sending crystalled ice scattering across the polished table. Brad began sputtering incoherent denials, his face contorted in disbelief. Victoria stared at the document, as if it might physically bite her, her mouth agape. Uncle Richard attempted to regain control, his voice sharper, more desperate than I had ever heard it. "This is impossible, Eliza! You couldn't possibly have acquired that building!" The purchase price was well over $20 million. I smiled a small, triumphant smile, enjoying his profound discomfort. $28 million, actually, Uncle Richard. All legally and ethically acquired through careful, strategic investment growth over the past 10 years. Every cent accounted for. I turned to address my cousins directly, their faces a mixture of shock, confusion, and dawning horror. "So, when you complained about construction noise during breakfast, Victoria," I said, my voice calm, precise, "you were complaining about security upgrades I personally ordered after the break, in on the 12th floor, a necessary improvement. And Blake, that unnecessary guest registration policy you objected to came after 3 separate incidents of unauthorized people accessing the gym and pool areas, compromising tenant safety and comfort. My improvements, incidentally, have increased the building's value and tenant satisfaction, despite your complaints. Their expressions of utter shock would have been comical under different, less dramatic circumstances. Uncle Richard, ever the strategist, was rapidly flipping through my financial statements, his brow furrowed in a desperate attempt to find a flaw, a loophole. "Even if this is all true, Eliza," he said, his voice strained, "it doesn't change the family voting structure regarding the mansion sale. The agreements have been prepared based on the established shareholding percentages. Your 2% is still 2%. This was the moment I'd been meticulously preparing for, the final, decisive blow. I placed one final document on the table, the freshly couriered incorporation papers for Elizabeth's legacy trust. "Actually, Uncle Richard," I said, my voice ringing with a new, undeniable authority, "there's been a very recent change in ownership structure, effective as of 9 o'clock this morning. I've transferred all my holdings to Elizabeth's Legacy Trust, which has simultaneously purchased Jenkins Development Company." I paused, letting the profound, devastating implications sink in, watching the realization dawn on Richard's face. Jenkins Development Company, as you might recall, currently owns 30% of Bennett family holdings, acquired slowly over the years through various proxy purchases, often on behalf of quiet, anonymous investors. The color drained completely from Richard's face as he finally, truly understood the sheer, undeniable magnitude of what had just happened. "That's not possible," he whispered, his voice barely audible, his eyes wide with a dawning horror. "We would have known. We would have been informed. Would you?" I asked quietly, my voice calm, infused with quiet power. "You were all so utterly convinced of my financial insignificance, so focused on your own displays of wealth, that no one bothered to notice what I was actually doing, what I was quietly building, all these years. You never looked beyond the surface." I turned to address the entire family, speaking with a calm authority that silenced even Brad's desperate, incoherent sputtering. "With my newly consolidated voting shares, I now control 35% of Bennett family holdings. Not quite a majority, perhaps, but certainly enough to block any major decision, including, Uncle Richard, the sale of this mansion." The silence that followed was absolute, suffocating. Even the usually unflappable Richard seemed utterly at a loss for words, his face a tableau of shock. Finally, Jessica, ever my steadfast ally, broke the tension with a slow, appreciative clap. "Well played, cousin," she said, a wide, genuine smile spreading across her face. "Grandma would be so proud." Brad, never one to accept defeat gracefully, pushed back violently from the table, his chair scraping loudly. "This is some kind of trick, Eliza! Some kind of legal maneuver! You can't just swoop in and take control after contributing nothing to the family business for years." I fixed him with a steady, unwavering gaze, my eyes cold. "I haven't taken control, Brad," I corrected him, my voice firm. "I've prevented the dismantling of Grandma's true legacy by people who've completely forgotten what that legacy truly means. I've preserved it." I calmly gathered my documents and returned to my seat, letting them process the seismic shift that had just occurred, the irreversible change in their power dynamic. "The mansion sale is off the table," I stated flatly, definitively. "A's for the apartment complex. Rest assured I have no plans to evict family members, although I will be reviewing the significant rent discounts some of you have been receiving compared to other tenants. Those will be adjusted to market rate." Victoria's face flushed with a mixture of anger and acute embarrassment, possibly both. Uncle Richard, ever the consummate strategist, was already recalibrating, his mind working furiously. His expression shifted rapidly from shock to a cold, calculating assessment of how to adapt to this new, undeniable reality. "Perhaps," he suggested, his tone notably more respectful, more deferential than it had been just minutes ago. We should discuss a more collaborative approach to family holdings going forward. A true partnership. I think that's wise, Uncle Richard. I agreed, my voice calm, controlled. Starting with a thorough review of Grandma's original vision for the family legacy, one based on stewardship rather than status, on growing wealth thoughtfully and responsibly, rather than displaying it ostentatiously for superficial gain. As I looked around at their stunned, bewildered faces, I felt not triumph, not vengeance, but a quiet, profound satisfaction that finally, after all these years, they were seeing me. Truly seeing me, for the very first time. In the days following my dramatic revelation, the Bennett family dynamics underwent a seismic shift that no one, least of all Uncle Richard, could have predicted. The immediate aftermath in that conference room was a chaotic blend of desperate recalibration, stunned disbelief, and clumsy attempts at reconciliation. Uncle Richard, ever the pragmatist, attempted to salvage his shattered authority with a forced composure. Brad alternated wildly between incoherent denials and clumsy attempts to reframe our relationship. Suddenly interested in my unique business perspective. Victoria, with a transparent lack of subtlety, suddenly discovered a deep respect for my business acumen that had apparently been invisible to her for decades. The transformation was both fascinating to observe and utterly transparent in itself, serving motivation. Richard was, predictably, the first to adjust his sails to the new wind. He invited me to a private lunch at his exclusive, members-only club, a place where he'd never once suggested I join him before, a clear symbol of his new, forced deference. "I've clearly underestimated you, Eliza," he admitted, studying me with genuinely new eyes across the gleaming white tablecloth, his voice devoid of its usual bluster. "Perhaps we've all been blinded by traditional expectations of success, by what we thought wealth was supposed to look like." I took a slow sip of my water, neither accepting nor rejecting his tentative olive branch. "Grandma would say we've confused the substance of wealth with its symbols, Uncle Richard." He nodded thoughtfully, a rare moment of genuine introspection. "Elizabeth always did have a different perspective than most of the family. I see now she passed that to you, unequivocally." His attempt at reconciliation was predictable, but it came with visible strings attached. Proposals for joining forces, for leveraging our combined influence, that revealed he still hadn't grasped the fundamental, unbridgeable difference in our core values. I listened politely, offering a respectful hearing, but made no commitments, explaining that any future collaboration would need to align strictly with the principles of responsible stewardship, of integrity and quiet purpose that Grandma had championed throughout her life. Aunt Catherine attempted a different approach, one steeped in social artifice. She invited me to her country club for tea, a place usually reserved for her most esteemed socialites, and suddenly expressed a fervent, almost theatrical interest in my philanthropic vision. After years of openly dismissing my charitable contributions as insignificant and quaint, the strain of pretending she hadn't spent decades condescending to me showed in the tight, unnatural corners of her smile. "Family is so important, don't you think, Eliza? Despite our little differences through the years," she suggested, patting my hand with a maternal gesture that would have been touching, if it weren't so transparently calculating. Brad took longer to approach me. His pride was clearly deeply wounded by the revelation that his supposedly struggling cousin was substantially wealthier than him, a blow to his carefully constructed ego. When he finally called, it was with a rushed, nervous business proposal, a development project he claimed desperately needed my unique perspective. Though it was transparently clear, he was primarily interested in access to my capital. I declined politely but firmly, suggesting he revisit some of Grandma's core investment principles if he truly wanted to discuss future collaborations built on genuine value, not just opportunistic access. Not everyone's reaction, thankfully, was self-serving. Jessica, who had stood steadfastly by me during the dramatic revelation, remained a steadfast, genuine ally in the complex family reconfiguration that followed. It's like watching a nature documentary. She joked over coffee a week after the confrontation, her eyes sparkling with amusement. Observe as the Bennett family members adapt to the new apex predator in their natural habitat. We laughed together, the genuine warmth and authenticity of our connection standing in stark, beautiful contrast to the suddenly solicitous, almost fawning attention from relatives who had previously dismissed me as irrelevant. I made conscious, deliberate decisions about which relationships to nurture, to invest in, and which to maintain at a polite, respectful distance. Those who showed genuine remorse for their previous treatment, those who truly sought to understand and reconcile, earned second chances. Those who merely adjusted their behavior, whose smiles were hollow and whose words were calculated, without real introspection or change of heart, received professional courtesy but little more. My inner circle remained small, built on trust and authenticity. The future of Grandma's mansion became my first major project, a tangible manifestation of my new role. Rather than selling it to developers for a quick profit, as Richard had so callously planned, I established it as the magnificent headquarters for the newly formed Elizabeth Bennett Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to affordable housing initiatives, financial literacy programs for underserved communities, and promoting responsible entrepreneurship among young people. The profound irony was not lost on me. The very family members who had mocked my supposed financial limitations, who had debated offering me charity, would now attend foundation events in a building preserved, sustained, and transformed by the very wealth they hadn't known I possessed. I maintained my modest apartment, my quiet home, and continued to drive my reliable Toyota, not out of necessity now, but out of continued conscious choice. The profound freedom of living unburdened by others' expectations, unchained from the endless pursuit of external validation, had become too valuable, too liberating to abandon, even now that my financial reality was undeniably known. My cousins still, occasionally, expressed bewildered amusement at my preference for substance over display, for quiet efficiency over ostentatious show, but they no longer dared to mistake it for inability, for poverty, or for a lack of options. The era of their casual condescension was definitively over. The most meaningful, most profound consequence of my revelation came 6 months later, an unexpected moment of grace. Martha, our family's long-time housekeeper, her face a map of quiet wisdom, approached me at a foundation event hosted at the mansion, her eyes shining. "Your grandmother visits me sometimes in my dreams, Miss Eliza," she confided, her weathered hand gently resting on mine, a touch of comforting warmth. "Last night she was positively glowing with pride, a radiant smile on her face. She said, Martha, she said, she understood all along what the others forgot. That wealth is meant to provide security for doing good, for creating opportunity, not for showing off, not for accumulating trophies." Tears pricked my eyes as Martha continued, her voice soft but firm. "Miss Elizabeth always said you were the one who truly inherited the Bennett spirit, Miss Eliza. Not just the name, or the money, but the very heart of it. The true legacy, that validation, that profound affirmation from someone who had known my grandmother intimately, who truly understood her values, meant more to me than all the newfound respect, all the belated admiration from family members who had dismissed me for decades. It was a healing balm to an old wound. My healing journey, I understood, wasn't instantaneous. The deep-seated hurt of decades of condescension, of subtle exclusion, of being perpetually underestimated, couldn't be erased by a single, dramatic moment of triumph. There were still, and occasionally would be, family gatherings where old patterns threatened to reassert themselves, where an almost reflexive, careless comment from Brad or Victoria would, for a fleeting moment, reopen old wounds. But with each passing month, with each new foundation initiative, I grew more comfortable, more grounded, in my new role as a guardian of Grandma's true legacy, finding a delicate, essential balance between forgiveness and maintaining healthy boundaries. The greatest lesson I learned through this entire journey wasn't, ironically, about money at all. It was about authenticity. For years, I'd allowed my family to misperceive me, to define me by their narrow standards, partly out of strategic necessity, but also partly out of a lingering, almost unconscious desire for their elusive approval. The profound freedom that came with finally being fully seen, with stripping away the facade and revealing my true self, whether they liked what they saw or not, was more valuable, more liberating, than any property in my extensive portfolio. I discovered, with a clarity that settled deep within my soul, that success without integrity becomes hollow, a mere accumulation of meaningless numbers. That wealth without purpose becomes a burden, a gilded cage, and that family connections without genuine respect, without mutual understanding, aren't worth maintaining, for they sap your spirit instead of nourishing it. Today, as I sit peacefully in Grandma Elizabeth's beloved rose garden, now preserved in perpetuity through the foundation, its blossoms vibrant and fragrant, I feel a sense of profound peace that transcends the vindication of that dramatic revelation day. The Bennett family continues to evolve, sometimes painfully, sometimes gracefully. Some relationships are slowly, tentatively healing into something authentic, something genuinely connected. Others maintain a respectful, if somewhat distant, cordiality. The mansion that was nearly sold for luxury condominiums, a symbol of everything Grandma despised, now hosts vital financial literacy, programs for young people from backgrounds similar to my mother's, the compassionate kindergarten teacher who married into wealth but never, ever forgot the fundamental value of hard work, genuine character, and quiet dignity. I still intentionally drive my reliable Toyota to foundation meetings where Uncle Richard arrives in his gleaming Bentley. But the difference now, the profound, unmissable difference, is that we both, unequivocally, understand that it's my choice, my deliberate, powerful choice, rather than my limitation. The true wealth I've built isn't just in my sprawling real estate portfolio. It's in the profound freedom to live authentically, regardless of others' opinions or judgments, to honor values that matter far beyond status and superficial display, and to use privilege, not as a tool for personal aggrandizement, but as a powerful lever for positive impact in the world. So, what about you? Have you ever been underestimated by family or friends, only to quietly, patiently, prove them wrong later? Or perhaps you're still in that building phase, that quiet period, where others don't yet see your true potential, don't yet grasp the empire you're meticulously constructing beneath the surface. I'd genuinely love to hear your stories in the comments below. Share your journey. And if this narrative, this journey of quiet determination, of strategic patience, and ultimately, of profound vindication, resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories about finding strength, authenticity, and profound self-worth, even when others don't yet see your true value. Thank you for joining me today. And always remember, sometimes, the most powerful move isn't displaying your advantages immediately, but waiting for the perfect, most impactful moment to quietly, decisively reveal them.